The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. The greatest trick Disney ever pulled was convincing the world that the MCU was a flawless movie-making machine. Yeah, the idea that the Marvel Cinematic Universe was this well-oiled machine was always a myth, and a poorly kept one at that if you read the trades or reported on the industry professionally. Heck, now we have entire books dedicated to just how many hurdles there were behind the scenes, making the Infinity Saga's success all the more impressive. See, it wasn't just the continuity nods or the comics-accurate costumes that made the first three phases of the MCU a success. It was the sense of forward momentum, the idea that even if you weren't in love with what was immediately on screen, it was all building to something, and everything leading up to it mattered, or at least could matter. Add in some perfect casting choices, some genuinely talented directors, and striking the right balance between acknowledging continuity while never letting it dictate the direction of future projects, and the end result was 23 films, $22.6 billion at the box office, and moments like this. But it's been almost 6 years since Avengers Endgame, and the illusion is well and truly broken. There are a lot of reasons why, some of which are entirely Marvel Studios' fault, like their mistreatment of VFX artists, diluting the brand with too much content, and the continued focus on multiverses even though it's only really worked once. While other issues were completely out of their control, the plague, the strikes, Chadwick Boseman's tragic passing, well-established stars deciding to step away, and Bob Chapek's infamous tenure as Disney CEO all come to mind. And while the Disney Plus shows have been all over the place quality-wise, the last few years of MCU films have fallen into one of two camps. They're either the end result of awkwardly mashing together different cuts of the same movie through rewrites and reshoots, or they're successes that can't be replicated. 3 generations of Spider-Man joining forces on the screen for the first time. A film-length tribute to the memory of Chadwick Boseman. James Gunn signing off on his triumphant run with the Guardians franchise. And Deadpool finally making his long-awaited MCU debut. Those are all things that work, but you can only do them once. And if you follow the franchise on any level, you already know the studio has tried to turn things around. Chapek got fired, Bob Iger came back, he came out publicly and said that they were going to pull back on quantity, which means not so many frickin' Disney Plus shows, and start focusing on quality again. But when he said that, a bunch of projects were already in some form of development, many of which were then halted once the writer's strike happened. Kevin Feige would then echo Iger's sentiments about bouncing back, but now when something from the MCU comes out, the question isn't, hey, is this good? It's, okay, was this slowed down by the plague and or the strike, or will this finally reflect the changes guys like Feige were talking about? And thus far, it keeps being the former and not the latter, because changing the creative direction of an entire film studio's output can't be done at the drop of a hat. As the old saying goes, big ships turn slowly. My prediction is that we won't see those changes until Fantastic Four in July, and by the way, if that movie's bad, we're in serious trouble. But until then, we've got a few projects that still need to get over the finish line. Which brings us to Captain America, the Marvel franchise that I'd argue has been hit by the behind-the-scenes turmoil harder than any of the others. Trying to replace Chris Evans as Steve Rogers would have been difficult under the best of circumstances, but as Deadpool reminded us,
you're joining at a bit of a low point.
In case you've been out of the loop, Steve Rogers retired as Captain America at the end of Avengers Endgame, giving his shield to Anthony Mackie's Sam Wilson. Fast forward to 2021 and we get The Falcon and the Winter Soldier as the second MCU Disney Plus show, where Sam comes to terms with what it means to be a black Captain America, Bucky continues to struggle as a man out of time, and the US government tries to make Kurt Russell's kid the new Cap. It doesn't go well. While I would argue the show was being lapped by another superhero series that was dropping at the same time, it did monstrous viewership numbers while riding the success of WandaVision and The Mandalorian Season 2. But with the show, you could already see how the plague was directly affecting productions, and it would be confirmed years later that a big storyline for the show had to be cut due to it sounding way too familiar to what was going on in the real world. But with the series drawing in big numbers and Marvel operating under the mindset of more is more at the time, it was announced on the same day as the series finale that a 4th Captain America movie was in the works. And, as recapped in a genuinely excellent video from New Rockstars, between then and today, the film has had to deal with controversy surrounding its original title, enough rewrites to wind up with 9 credited writers, the producer behind the film leaving the company after nearly 15 years, the release date getting pushed back about 9 months, the death of original Thunderbolt Ross actor William Hurt, the writers and actors strikes, reshoots and new scripts that saw actors like WWE's Seth Rollins get cut,
cut, while Giancarlo Esposito was added in, poorly received test screenings that led to even more reshoots, and a controversy surrounding the casting of Shira Haas as Ruth Bat Saraf, known in the comics as the Israeli superhero Sabra.
Which brings us to Captain America Brave New World, which, while better than some of the clunkier offerings from phases 4 and 5, shows all the signs of a chaotic production. It's not a hopeless mess, but it's not the turning point that many MCU fans are hoping for. We'll have to wait until May to see if Thunderbolts can pull that off.
As for the story, Sam has settled into his new role as Cap, Danny Ramirez as Joaquin Torres as the new Falcon, and Thunderbolt Ross, now played by Harrison Ford, has just been elected President of the United States. But instead of trying to hunt down the Hulk again or push new legislation to further reel in superheroes, Ross seems to be making a genuine go at turning over a new leaf by running on a platform of unity and attempting to stave off a multinational war over resources. Yes, the MCU finally got around to addressing the corpse of the Celestial Tiamat sticking out of the Indian Ocean, which it turns out is full of adamantium that the US, France, India, and Japan are all trying to call dibs on. But things get thrown into chaos when a group of sleeper agents are suddenly activated and try to kill Ross and other world leaders during a peace conference. One of these agents is Isaiah Bradley, the super soldier Sam befriended during Falcon and Winter Soldier, which causes Cap and Falcon to spring into action to try and clear his name and find out who's really pulling the strings. From there, the film plays out like a political mystery thriller similar to The Winter Soldier, one where the mystery would have been much more interesting had Marvel not loudly announced a certain casting choice years ago. Seriously, they did a good job with sprinkling hints about the character before his big reveal, and if that had been kept secret, it could have gone over like gangbusters, given how it finally closes the loop on one of the MCU's oldest cliffhangers. I won't spoil how, but the reveal winds up being a much more personal attack on Ross, culminating in the big Falcon vs. Red Hulk fight that has been featured in all of the advertising. As for the positives, I'm a big fan of Anthony Mackie. He's been a great addition to the MCU from the jump. He's a solid leading man, go watch Twisted Metal if you need more proof, and his character has evolved to where him being Cap works. He's not Chris Evans, but he's also not trying to be. Harrison Ford wound up being the surprise highlight. I know we're all used to his grumpy affect in interviews and looking completely checked out in certain movies, but here he's locked in and giving it his all. He gives much more pathos and internal conflict to Ross than Hurt ever did, and you genuinely believe he's trying to be a better person, even as the countdown to his red-faced rampage inevitably approaches. I didn't realize just how much I've missed Ford firing on all cylinders, and damn if it wasn't nice to see it again. The same cannot be said for the film's structure, as signs of rewrites, reshoots, and conflicting creative directions are all over the place. Scenes feel like they were cobbled together, where it's hard to tell if two actors were ever in the same room with each other. The CGI is noticeably sloppy at times. Sam's motivation seems to change every 10 minutes. He's suddenly debating whether or not to take the super soldier serum again with like 20 minutes left in the movie. His rapport with Ross changes from scene to scene. Ideas like rebuilding the Avengers are presented and then immediately dropped. Esposito is wasted in the small handful of scenes he's given. And while the surprise reveal means the film has another high-quality actor at its disposal, it feels like no one could resolve how their story was supposed to end. They essentially step aside right before the climax, which will have you thinking, oh, so the stuff with the Red Hulk is just a distraction for the real climax, but then we get the big fight and the movie just starts wrapping things up. It feels like there was a plan for something either much bigger or more subversive, but then they chopped it off and called it a day. It also does that thing the last two Cap movies did where it shows the on-the-ground shockwaves of the major MCU events, but instead of reacting to the attack in New York or Ultron destroying Sokovia, it's responding to the events of Falcon and the Winter Soldier Season 1 and the Eternals, and you can feel just how much of a downgrade that is.
If you're like me and you were hoping that Cap 4 would be the first real sign of the MCU getting its groove back, Brave New World will seem like a letdown. Still, there is plenty to enjoy with Mackie and Ford, and it is still better than some of Marvel's other recent offerings. And while it may be the weakest of the Cap films, I am by no means ready to write off the Sam Wilson version of Captain America, and I'm genuinely curious to see how he'll fit into everything once Phase 6 rolls around. I hope to see you guys then, and thanks for watching.